Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and welcome to another episode of Haunted Gaming. This time we take a look at Newly Single, a Huniepop creepypasta. I know, you might have some quality expectations with the game in question, but sit back, relax, because this one is actually quite interesting. It's going to be pretty lengthy, so again, make sure you got some stuff to relax with, because we're about to dive into Newly Single, a Huniepop creepypasta. That being said, let's see what this one has to offer.
Jeff, you are likely baffled and upset by what you have just experienced, but all will become clear, I hope, by the end of this correspondence. First and foremost, I'd like to once again offer condolences on the passing of your wife. This statement may prove to sound counterintuitive after you have read the remainder of the letter, but I truly do empathize and sympathize with you in your loss. That does not negate the other emotions I hold for you in the least, the jealousy, rage, pity, and despair I feel all swirl in the whirlwind of confusion, even after so many months of analyzing and praying over the loss of our mutual friend.
It's a good thing that some people still take the time to check the spam folders in their email accounts. Jeff Bauman always checked his, and usually found something interesting that he would have otherwise missed. Today it was a message from a mutual friend of his and his late wife, Erin, a man named Kevin. Kevin something. Truth be told, Kevin was much closer to Erin than he had been to Jeff, and that was fine. But the two sometimes used to email each other, interesting news stories or games, sometimes videos. The particular message appeared to have been sent several times in the past week or so. Jeff simply thought that this message contained some especially funny video, or amusing game, and Kevin wanted to make sure it got through. It was a bit strange to get a message from Kevin out of the blue like this. They hadn't really spoken much about it since after the funeral. Honestly, Jeff had always wondered if his wife had a little bit of a crush on Kevin. Jeff never worried about it too much. At 27 and 24 years old when she died, he and Erin had been married for a few years, and if she had a little crush on another guy, it didn't make him feel too jealous or threatened. The subject of the email, "Hey man, check this out," was vague enough that Jeff had no idea what was in it, only noting that it had several attachments. The emails read out the attachment contained a few cracked Steam games, and a bootleg copy of the new Avengers movie that wasn't coming out for another week or so. The crack games included titles from the Counter-Strike and Dead Island series, as well as two standalones, Goat Simulator and Huniepop. Not being much of a PC gamer, Jeff was only vaguely familiar with Goat Simulator and Huniepop, and thought of them as simple novelty games, but free is free, so he downloaded and installed all of the games. Goat Simulator was pretty self-explanatory, but all he really knew about Huniepop was that it was some kind of dating sim? Whatever that was. He knew it was something to do with naked anime chicks, and that was enough to pique his curiosity, so after a quick glance into the life of an adventurous goat, he started up games with the naked chicks, intending to play for a bit before watching the unreleased Avengers sequel. Forbidden fruit, as they say. Huniepop started with a jaunty tune and the image of a harems worthy of busty western-looking anime girls, a promising start. Although he and Erin had checked out a few hentai videos early in their marriage one drunken night, well, truth be told, only Jeff had been drunk, Erin had mostly giggled and made fun of the inane plots and ludicrously proportioned women, Jeff played along, too embarrassed to admit that he thought the flick was actually pretty hot. This was the type of game that he would likely have hidden from his wife if she was still around, or tried to at least. Jeff played through the first tutorial round, and it became apparent that the main gameplay was going to be based on puzzle matching along the lines of Candy Crush or Bejeweled, alongside with some columns in Dr. Mario and the obligatory Tetris binge in his childhood. Jeff had never really played many tile matching puzzlers and didn't know whether he liked them or not. As he continued to play through the dates in Huniepop, it became apparent that he did in fact like the style of game. So much so that although he intended to play only for an hour or so, until 10 at least, then watch the pirated Avengers film, he wound up staying in the world of Huniepop until just past midnight, without realizing how much time had passed.
I don't need to remind you of the relationship the three of us had. I think you and I know more about the other than we ever let on, and Erin is the common denominator in the equation. If a man doesn't have his pride, his sense of self-worth, if he lies in bed at night contemplating the day and can put a mental checkmark next to each task he intended to fulfill save for one, night after night, what is his quality of life when one realizes that good enough, despite one's best intention, has never actually been good enough? What should be the next course of action?
The following day, Jeff could barely keep his mind focused during his therapy session. or the court-ordered Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that came afterwards. He was preoccupied with the thought of getting back to his computer to ask and answer more questions with his digital girlfriends. By the time it came to hold hands and recite the Lord's Prayer at the end of the AA meeting, he was ruminating over what drinks to buy each of his eager, sex-deprived lady friends when he met them at the bar. Their favorites were conveniently listed in the Huniepop, the in-game mobile database of girls, but Jeff thought it would be good to mix things up for them as well. Returning home that afternoon, the plan had been to watch the Avengers: Age of Ultron, then play some more Huniepop. After 30 minutes into the pirated movie, Jeff realized that he hadn't been paying attention and barely knew what was going on. He decided to finish the flick later, and after a few dates before starting the game up, he shot a quick text message to Kevin, thanking him for the movie and the games. The dating sim in particular, the response NP would go unread until after the Huniepop session was done a few hours later. Jeff had formulated a strategy for playing the game. By the time he had done some Google research and learned that after a few successful dates with a certain girl, you can take her back to your room for a bonus sex round. That the point was, in fact, to bed each of the available girls as the difficulty of the rounds increased. His master plan was to play until every available girl was at the stage where one more good date round would result in the sex round, and then go through each of the girls one by one in-game night at a time. He had decided to go after the Japanese girl Aiko first, then try for the blue-haired gamer girl Nikki.
It may seem odd to you to be spoken to about pride from the man who was your late wife's paramour in the final year of her life. I imagine this information comes to you as only a minor shock. I'd be surprised if you didn't at least suspect that Aaron was not being entirely faithful to you. But I bet on some level you were certain. Young married couples rarely last these days, all things considered. You're fairly lucky as far as cuckolds go. I'm clean and discreet. At heart, I'm a good guy, and despite the fact that we haven't known each other very long, I think you're probably not too bad either. Otherwise, Erin would have felt it necessary to keep you in her life. But it could have just been guilt. I wonder at this point if you could even put any of those pieces together. I'm sure you remember the date as far as the game is concerned. The name of the month doesn't matter, but it was a Thursday the 9th. Did that mean anything to you? For the past year, your wife and I have been in what we call a wonderful, albeit abnormal, relationship. It may have started out as a sex thing, but it evolved into so much more. The fact that she had known you for so long and really had only ever dated you had her in a kind of blissful ignorance. I brought her to a state of blissful awareness. She seemed to think that the life of unfulfilled promises from a man who drinks and plays video games every day was what marriage was all about. I didn't steal your love away. You pushed her out and took her for granted. Whether she ended up leaving you or not, her wavering faith was inevitable. I could go on about how your fault and my strengths, but it doesn't really matter, especially now. Nothing can bring your wife back. I know you suffered in this. I mean, how could you not? But that isn't enough. I'm not talking about justice or revenge or anything that dramatic. I'm talking about evening up a little bit. The night she lost her life, the night that you were driving back from some dipshit party with a blood alcohol level of 0.21. A night of mutual regret for all involved. Do you remember that I do volunteer work sometimes? That my main job is driving ambulances and emergency response vehicles? You know I was one of the first responders on the scene, not that it made any difference.
Part of the game involves talking with each of the player's potential mates, asking and answering questions to earn honey, one of the game's form of currency, the other being called money. The questions the player may ask range from inane, what's your favorite color, to the keystone of every successful relationship, what cup size are you rocking? Remember, the answers each girl gives to these questions help the players earn more honey. Players are also periodically asked questions by the girls, requiring them to recall the information given in an earlier conversation or just look up answers online, or wishing to hear his or her responses in the hypothetical or personal question. Things like, what would you do if you found someone's wallet on the street, or how many girls are you seeing right now? Sometimes Jeff found the questions to be fun, other times annoying, and sometimes just bizarre. From time to time, the game seemed to glitch on certain questions to ask or answer. The words would display on the screen, but there was no voiceover. This typically happened on what Jeff felt were the stranger questions. At one point, the game's Indian girl, Belly, asked, do you ever dream about it? With no clarification at another, the cheerleader Tiffany posed the query, how much did you remember the next day? These odd inquiries were not common, but still confusing and a bit off-putting. They seemed to pop up at entirely random intervals. Jeff was interested to see if correctly answering these was some kind of subplot or alternate gameplay mode that only a few people know of. He hadn't read anything about other players encountering weird questions or glitches, but he knew that there could be some hidden characters and Easter eggs in the game. It seemed that no one had figured this out yet, and, well, he couldn't tell if he was playing through these segments correctly. He seemed to earn no honey from any of these answers he gave or questions he posed. Eventually, he just began answering them randomly and moving on to the next. Not being very adept at tile-matching puzzle games, it sometimes took a while for him to achieve a successful date. And he preferred to stick to one girl at a time, attempting to win a date round with her before going to win another date round with any of the other girls. He often found himself forgetting to use the power-ups he had even earned along the process. This made for a slow go of things, but Jeff was glad to stretch out the gameplay for a little bit longer. Now, at certain points of the gameplay, an unknown new girl would show up in the selection menu, usually in the evening or nighttime. Her picture was always grayed out, but she was not listed as being asleep. Jeff thought that this must be one of the unlockable characters in the game, that he had needed to do some kind of action at a certain time or place or get to where he could finally meet her. Whenever this girl would show up in the Honeybee, he would attempt to give her certain items or to whichever girl he was with, to see if this would unlock the hidden character. It never worked, and after he went to visit another girl he went on a date, the mystery woman would be gone again. In some of the early research Jeffrey did in the game, he read something about the unlockable girls being a cat girl and some kind of alien woman. He stopped reading so as to not ruin the surprise of finding them or discovering other secrets. The unknown icon didn't look like it had whiskers or cat ears, from what he could tell, so he decided that it must have been the extraterrestrial, or some other girl that he didn't even read about at all. Now, after a few more date rounds you win, the more hearts are displayed on each woman's profile, and after a few days of playing, Jeff had gotten all the girls up to around 3 hearts out of a possible 5. Though when a girl has 4 hearts, it is possible to take her to bed after a date at night. The plan was to keep going on daytime dates until everyone had all 5 hearts filled. Playing in this manner made the experience last much longer. Now, in the meantime, Jeff Bowman had started an additional save file on the game to attempt meeting the girls in a different order to see if it resulted in any changes in gameplay. There were no major differences of note, but this also served to extend the time he spent playing the game. In both save files, he encountered a few of the uncharacteristic questions, some of the same and a few different ones. He comes across one inquisition from Audrey, the mega bitch character, that read, "What's the best part?" with 3 choices of answers: no in-laws at Christmas, the bed all to myself, and no nagging about booze and dope. This quiz was one that struck Jeff rather sharply, as they seemed to relate to bachelorhood, which he recently had somewhat thrust upon him. But at least this question appeared to have some relation to the game, as the Audrey character openly uses illegal drugs, and one of the answers mentioned them. Jeff chose the third option and the reply came up: "At least you're honest, you son of a bitch."
By the time anyone noticed the tired tracks leading into the woods, it was already after 9 a.m. You were hours into a blackout sleep, and she had long since bled out. Already starting to stiffen up, they think you wrapped around the maple tree around 3 or so, leaving plenty of time for your lovely wife to scream at you to wake up, grope fruitlessly for her cell phone, shout for help into the night, claw for the release of her seatbelt until her nails bent back and snapped away from the quick. I bet you were snoring. She said that you snored like a boar when you were drunk. You got to sleep and dream away the wee hours of the morning with barely more than a concussion. Erin didn't get that luxury. She was awake and aware until the late stages of hypovolemic shock started. Pinned in the passenger seat with a kinked spinal cord, she got to watch the sunrise while her severed but, pinched femoral artery trickled until she was cold and blue. There was something else that never got into the report that you never heard about. She had enough room to move her left arm a little, enough to reach a few things like the still functional car lighter, and a few things in the center console. One of these things were one of your hidden joints. She told me that 2 of the 3 times she started smoking pot a few years ago turned out awful. The others got her pretty relaxed. I guess at one point she decided that you weren't going to wake up and that there wasn't any help coming. So she lit it up and took a few drags. We found the roach stuck to her shirt in a congealed stream of blood and vomit. I can only hope that it eased her last moments on the planet.
At last, the game came when Jeff could begin taking his digital girlfriends on night dates and hopefully getting the bonus sex rounds. As silly as it may have been sounding to others, Jeff had, knowing that he had a night off to play the game, picked up a bottle of Chivas Regal Scotch for the occasion. Before the car accident, it was not uncommon for him to have a few drinks and play some video games. But since the publicity of the wreck and the general knowledge in the community that he had been attending 12-step meetings, he tried to keep his drinking more hidden than ever. He had driven about 40 miles out of his way to hit a liquor store, where he and his car wouldn't be recognized. The save file he loaded started him out in the morning, and he set out to chat with some girls before taking the Asian girl Akio on a date at night. Twice when he was talking to different women before the dating began, he was met with a question screen with no real text in it, just series of ellipses and the girls making their disappointed faces. He thought that he must have done something wrong in playing the game up to the point, but it didn't seem to be affecting the main flow of things. He hoped it didn't affect the dates. In-game of evening turned into night, and he met up with Aiko at the bar and lounge stage. He used the money that he had accrued to buy his date a few drinks, starting off with some sake, her favorite, and later some wine, as he dragged and dropped the static booze icons over his potential lover's face, prompting such realistic replies as, "That was a pussy drink. Hit me with something stronger." Jeff poured himself a neat scotch and gulped the smooth amber depressant. After a bit of smoozing, Jeff asked a Japanese college professor out on a date. The puzzle round at Vinny's restaurant went very well, and Jeff got the required score to win using 17 of his 20 allotted moves, resulting in Aiko making the offer to come over tonight for a private lesson. Jeff would not have refused the offer even if he had been given the chance to. For a few seconds, between the date round fading out and the appearance of the text indicating the change of location to your bedroom, a corrupted image appeared on the screen and flickered before the bedroom sex bonus round started. It wasn't there long enough to make much sense of it, but it appeared to be just a jumble-up collage of game images. At long last, it was time for Jeff Bowman to be stripped from his digital virginity, and mechanics of the bonus round were slightly different from the normal dates in that the tiles matched gave the same amount of points, and the total score was constantly decreasing. This made for a race against the clock feel, a mad dash to match as many tiles as quickly as one could achieve the highest score. Jeff, playing with a mouse, was a bit hampered by having to click and drag the tiles where he wanted to place them, where a touchscreen would have been optimal for speed no matter. He was determined to max out the pleasure meter and win that bonus round. Jeff hadn't realized that as he was scanning the tile grid, trying to plan 2 and 3 moves ahead, he had began to sweat and he was biting his top lip with increased ferocity. When he crested his halfway mark on the pleasure meter, he barely even noticed that the bra his inanimate, computerized lover was wearing disintegrated and her shiny, high-definition breasts were on full display. His tile matching became more frantic as Akio's moans increased in frequency. Before he could feel the pleasure meter, he began to climax the oversexed professor. His monitor started flicking and glitching. Before he could register what was happening, the screen had gone black.
Not sure if you knew about this, but it also looked like she used a car lighter to ignite some papers in the owner's manual. We found a few burnt-up napkins in the owner's booklet with singed corners a few feet from the wreck. I guess she was trying to start a fire to raise some smoke to signal anyone in the vicinity. It didn't work. She must have realized that starting a fire could have burned the 3 of you alive. You probably would have slept through it, but she was still awake at that point. Can you imagine the desperation, the loss of hope that would make a person consider that? I try not to think about it too much.
Blinking his dry eyes, Jeff unclenched his jaw and leaned back from the blank monitor. As a formality, he poured another tall scotch into his tumbler and swallowed it in the single opening of his throat. Taking no time to enjoy the taste of the pricey booze, he hissed the burn out through his teeth, then assessed the situation. Before he was able to start clicking around to test the computer, the game returned to the screen. The date appeared in white text as usual, followed by an image that was familiar, but also unique. What Jeff saw was a new girl, one that he hadn't encountered or seen pictures of before. She was standing in a park at night looking downtrodden. She was built differently than any of the other girls in the game. She looked overweight, dumpy even, wearing jeans and a black t-shirt with a Judas Priest logo. The detail is what struck Jeff, a plain black Judas Priest shirt, pretty much identical to the one that his wife owned. It was at this point that he glanced down to the left lower corner of the screen and saw the icon of the unknown girl that he had noticed grayed out while he had been playing. She was now in color and had a name, Erin. Shock is a word that gets used a lot in daily conversation, but it was probably the most appropriate word for Jeff's reaction to seeing a Japanese anime interpretation of his dead spouse in an adult puzzle dating simulator. I know. He couldn't find his breath for several seconds, and there was an icy sensation of pins and needles blooming steadily just under his sternum. He gaped at the unhappy-looking cartoon woman on the screen, noting her bright emerald green eyes, a shade of contact lenses that Erin sometimes wore, her deep violet hair, the color she had dyed it on New Year's Eve 3 years ago, the color she always said, only half-jokingly, that she wanted to have dyed permanently. The physique that he had initially noticed as being dumpy was in fact a fairly accurate representation of the way Erin had looked in the last few years of her life. Following a series of surgeries, she put on quite a bit of weight and was never able to lose much of it. He was gazing at, all things considered, an accurate representation of her as he could possibly expect. But why? After finally regaining some of his senses, Jeffrey had another drink, this time forgoing the glass in favor of sloppily kissing the glass from the bottle. The cold sensation in his insides began to abate a little, and he started looking at the rest of the game's screen. He made note of all the normal game menus were listed, but not all functional. Many of the buttons did nothing when clicked. The heart meter was completely empty, as were the hunger and intoxication meters. He was able to check Aaron's profile, and this buried any doubts he could have hoped to have any, about coincidence or the like. All the information was on the screen. Her name, her married name, her name was there, her late winter birthday, job at a gift shop, short stature, even the size of her bra was dead on. He couldn't scroll through the rest of the Honeybee in-game app, but he had no need to. Everything he had already seen was enough to send his head spinning. Again, he saw that none of the hearts were filled, and yet one of the only options he seemed to be able to click on was Ask on Date, which stated that it would be a night date instead of a first date. The only other thing to do seemed to be to talk with her. Even though it was listed that no honey points would be awarded for doing so, against his better judgment, he clicked the light blue button to engage her in Huniepop's version of conversation.
And yes, I did say the three of you. That wasn't a typo. While you spent the past few months in a haze of booze and pot, Erin told me that she had become, as they say, comfortably numb everywhere. Maybe you didn't find her sexy since she gained weight. Maybe you lost your libido, but she hadn't lost hers. You may not have noticed, but she told me that she had been waking up in the night and getting sick. She was weeks late. I got no doubt who the father would have been. The plan was to tell you together, the two of us, and you. It seemed obvious to me, but I guess you guys couldn't see that things were through. Although she told me about your problems in bed, she had once mentioned you still had a fondness for more animated girls. I had a feeling you would eventually get around to playing Huniepop. I don't know shit about programming, but my little brother does. And I'm a fair artist. I just wanted to tell you, to show you what I saw and experienced these past few months in a way that might actually make an impact on your slowly pickling brain. In a way, you have a right to know everything. Now you do. Maybe now I can get some closure. As for you, you're on your own. I imagine you will have more questions, but I honestly don't care now. I sympathize for you and your loss, but I also never want to see or hear from you again. I hope we can at least grant each other that. With sympathies, Kevin Randall.
A message popped up in the text window. It read, "How long has it been?" with 3 choices of answers in the usual fashions. One was 6 months or so, the next almost a year, and finally over a year. Swigging another few fingers worth of scotch, he clicked the second option. Immediately another question appeared. Is things easier now? Are things easier? Jeff thought about this answer. His life was most definitely a bigger mess than it had ever been, with court orders, fines, and the guilt. He chose to answer reading, "No, things have only gotten worse." This prompted a text reading. I sincerely wish that both of us had thought about that beforehand. Afterwards, the main set of options came back up, except that talk with her was no longer a clickable choice. The only other option was to go on a date. There was part of him, a really large and glaring part, that told Jeff to just stop and go to bed, not to even think about what was happening until morning, but the slightly greater majority of his brain felt compelled to click the date button. Jeff was experiencing a strange combination of awe and despair. He hated thinking about his wife and what had happened to her, replaying everything he could remember about the night of the accident, a loop that sometimes robbed him for sleep for days on end. There was also a sense now that he was now in this. He was already ruminating about his current conundrum, as well as experiencing the familiar undertow of shame that he feared would tear him apart if he ever really sat and thought about it. If he didn't at least see this through to the end, he would have yet another sense of unfinished business to throw on this ever-growing pile. The best he could do for his conscience was to play it out a little longer before analyzing it, and he clicked that date button. The images on screen dissembled and faded to black as usual. The standard text faded in, announcing that the setting was changing back to the bedroom. It appeared that there would be no formal date around this time. The bedroom appeared and the gameplay-gridden girl slid into view. Erin was standing on the screen, looking sad or disappointed, like she was in the previous screen. But this time, in the fashion of the game, she was standing in her underwear, whereas the in-game girls typically had sexy matching undergarments, she was instead simply wearing an unflattering ensemble of a black padded bra and dull blue panties. There was no soundbite from her, as there is in standard bedroom rounds before gameplay commences. She just stood there for a few seconds before the tiles dropped into the grid. The tiles themselves were not the standard mix of varied colors and shapes, but instead were limited to two varieties. The broken heart tiles, which dropped the player's score, and a new round red tile that Jeff didn't even recognize. As there were only two types, it was inevitable that there would occur several 3-tile matches without any player input. In fact, Jeff found that if he tried to click in the puzzle grid, nothing happened. The tiles just kept matching, disappearing, and being replaced from the top. Despite that, there was no score accumulating. The counter under the tile grid simply read a static 0-0 the entire time. As there was really nothing to do, Jeff just watched the tiles match and drop, trying to figure out what the red tile tokens were. They were constantly in motion, so it was hard to get a good look at them. But they appeared to Jeff to look like smudged crimson eyeballs, or little red-toned sonogram images. The more he studied them, the more they looked to him like the latter, shifting his gaze back to the right side of the screen. He saw the half-naked girl, his wife, staring back at him, never blinking or speaking like the girls always do in these puzzle rounds. After almost a minute of watching the tiles fall and match themselves, Erin's image began to change. It flicked a few times, then was replaced by a distorted version of itself. The new Erin remained static, her skin now pale and tinted blue. There were dark circles forming under increasingly glazed over eyes. A small bruise appeared in the corner of her mouth. The tiles continued to fall as a new pale woman started out from the monitor. Jeff started barely comprehending what he was seeing. His hand had moved from the computer mouse and was simply covering his slightly open mouth. Almost before he could register what he was seeing, the image of his wife began to change again. The skin took on a more pallid hue and became mottled with bruises and a spiderweb of veins. Splotches of purple and gray and sickly green covered her body. Dark streaks soon showed across her forehead, and from the nose of the girl, inky, clotted blood. 2 deep gashes were visible, one on her leg and another on her forearm, oozing rivulets of gore. The sight was almost more than Jeff could take. He hadn't been awake when the ambulance and police had shown up at the scene of the car accident that had taken Erin's life, but he was aware that she had lain there dead for several hours when he was passed out. The thought was something that he had tried to push from his brain every day, but now it was staring at him with glassy eyes. He closed his eyes tightly, and a tear ran from between his lids down to the crease of his nostril. When he opened his watery eyes again, the tiles stopped dropping and the sound cue for the winning a date was played. The word success appeared on the grid as usual. As there was no closing dialogue from his minimal research on the game, he knew that following the bedroom round, a graphic and lewd picture was meant to appear on screen. What Jeff saw, when the screen faded back and made his insides sink, he brought a new wave of choking, dry sobs. The image that materialized was not an anime-style drawing of a naked woman, but instead a dark, corrupted picture of a woman lying face-up in a patch of dead grass, dark streaks running from her nose, and a gash on her forehead. Gray veins could be seen creeping up on her neck, and her eyes were darkly bruised. This must have been a photograph taken from the scene of the car wreck. This was Erin before she was taken to the morgue, mere hours after her life had ceased. Jeff buried his face in his hands and coughed out low moaning sobs. Huniepop closed itself and the standard desktop returned. There was a new notification from the email app in the tray. Jeff, you are likely baffled and upset by what you have just experienced. But all will become clear, I hope, by the end of this correspondence. Well, that was a Huniepop creepypasta, and I'll start off by saying I am no expert in what Huniepop really is, aside from it as a dating simulator with a premise or gameplay element similar to Candy Crush. But all I have to say is this creepypasta is actually really interesting, very intriguing. So if you piece together what was happening, our protagonist ended up killing his wife and her child in a drunken car crash. Looks like drinking really had gotten to him. In fact, it played around with this detached form of storytelling where partially it was email and the other half was, the game. Now, being so distanced from it all, you actually saw two sides of the emotion here in the writing. The email was just so aggressive, constant blame being shifted, and then you get parts of the game where it really does feel so emotionally detached from the whole situation. It's like some completely different kind of story. It put you into the respective moods of each side of the coin. Now, no character, the protagonist, nobody here in this creepypasta is really a likable character in their own merit. They're all liars and cheats in some ways, but it serves realistic in this purpose. It's not like one character just has traits that are just so ungodly high for their, status or whatever, that are just so unrealistic from a character perspective. They're all real, even though they're not likable. And with that, you actually do kind of feel this true dread and sorrow on the subject as a whole, and that's really gripping. To use a game like Huniepop is no small feat. The game is a dating simulator, but using its core premise, the core ideology of the game, to detail a story and allow you to see with these virtual goggles are interesting. In the end of it all, being hacked and all, and modded to showcase the death of the wife, it was interesting, and hell, I'd kind of say it was realistic, even technically. An old friend showing his disinterested, alcoholic ex-friend the truth through this game, it was eerie. Hell, halfway in I thought it was gonna end in some kind of suicide, but it didn't, and that's where it ends beautifully. It used this game and got more dark as time went on and built up to this revelation. It didn't just toss gore into Huniepop. No. It used Huniepop. It used the game. It started off as just a simple dating simulator in this creepypasta and ended up just showing you the dark truth of the reality behind the whole creepypasta. Why these characters were brought to where they are in the game. Why this creepypasta exists in the first place. It used that game perfectly. And that, in essence, is what Haunted Gaming really does consider a good creepypasta. It was handled beautifully and edited realistically. The note at the end of it all, and the intrigue was used properly to climax the whole tale. Now, there are moments where I think the creepypasta goes above and beyond, and it tries to reach for areas that I really don't think it should, but, any creepypasta that I've read has that kind of an issue. But this one sticks with itself. It uses game to its proper, premise. It does what it needs to do right. And all in all, I'm really proud of it. I was afraid because it felt similar to the Talking Angela creepypasta. I looked at the title and I was worried, is this really worth making an episode about? But it was. And again, don't judge a book by the cover, or in this situation, don't judge a creepypasta by the title. This was a Huniepop creepypasta, and I really, really did enjoy it. And that being said, as always, I want to ask you, what did you think of this creepypasta? What would you change to make it better? And what would you rate it? Let me know in the comments below. This has been another episode of Haunted Gaming. And if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. This is me, Mudahar, and I'm out.